Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Amanda Jayatissa. Amanda is the author of My Sweet Girl, which won the International Thriller Writers Award for Best First Novel, and You're Invited. She grew up in Sri Lanka and currently lives in Portugal with her husband and 2 spoiled huskies. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
It's so exciting. Let's talk. I just have to dig right in because I loved your book so much, and I was a huge fan of your first 2 books. So this is really different, but equally fabulous. So we're going to talk a lot about that. And I told Amanda that I'm wearing my Killer Women sweater, which was a little Christmas present. So I'm, we got all the merch going. So tell our listeners about Island Witch.
Great. Okay. Where to start? So there are a series of attacks plaguing this small coastal village in colonial Ceylon, which is what Sri Lanka was called back in the colonial times. And well, it isn't long before the villagers begin to turn on and suspect the local demon priest. His daughter, Amara, who is our main character in this story, she's of course convinced of her father's innocence, and she's trying desperately to clear his name. Except she's been having these eerie dreams that have been predicting the attacks, and she can't shake this feeling that it's all connected to this one day where she woke up dazed and confused to her mother's cries that no one can find out about this. So
Yes. So this is I was trying to even find something comparable, but it is so well, first of all, I love the fact that it feels very much like Sri Lanka. Like it's a whole new world for us. That the village, the coastal town, the like you said, the demon priest, like that is not something that obviously, I mean, we have a lot of experience with in our generation,
Sure.
nor
Of
sort
course.
of in America. So, tell us, I know you said in the acknowledgments that this was a hard book to write. Some books just write themselves, and this was a tough one. Tell us a little bit about where did the idea come from? Is this something? Are there stories in here that are from your growing up, or what? Where did this come from?
Yeah, so well, for me, of course, it's always fun to bring in elements of like my Sri Lankan culture into the
Yes.
stories that I say. I think they always manage to find ways. I always try to find ways to sneak it in, regardless of sort of the setting and the time period. But this was, of course, like hard to escape because it's like bang on set in Sri Lanka, right?
Yes.
The story itself is actually a reimagining of an origin story, really, of this very, very popular ghost, our most famous ghost, if you will, called Mohini. She is Sri Lanka's sort of quintessential woman in white. I think every culture has some version of this story of this woman, dressed in white, stopping people as they're traveling or targeting men usually, or travelers, or Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has this story. We call her Mohini, and it was like my favorite story to tell growing up. Right? It's like I still remember my cousins and I. We would like huddle around a candle and like tell these ghost stories. And Mohini was my story. That was a story I would always tell of this woman who would flag down solo travelers, as they were either walking or like driving by, and ask them for help. And she'd be holding a baby. So people would feel inclined to stop and help her. And there are so many endings to this story, right? Some people say that like she would bite their head off. Some people say that she'd get into the car and like the car would be found crashed like a few days later. There are so many different endings, but it always really intrigued me, because beyond this story of a woman dressed in white and holding a child, we really didn't know much else. Everything else was what we would all just, say to scare ourselves.
Right.
So I thought that that would be really fun, kind of to talk about and give a voice to. But I also, something that's always really intrigued me were sort of these ideas of exorcisms and sort of demons. We call them yaku, gods, we call them devio. And they're so, for me, it's so interesting because the lens in which we see these spirits and entities is so different from what we see in like its portrayal in the West, right?
Right.
Even like even the idea of an exorcism, and I grew up, so I was like a big fan, right, of like stories surrounding exorcism and demons, and I watch a lot of horror movies, I read a lot of books in that space. But it was interesting to me how different it is, the way, and I say is because we still see demons and exorcisms and things carried out like this, very, very similar to the way they're spoken about in the book. It still kind of happens to this day. So so it was very interesting for me to talk about these things and kind of like put them out there so that maybe other people could also learn a little bit about my culture and the way it works.
I mean, I thought it's, it's of course Buddhism and Hinduism. And then in the book, of course, the British are coming. So you've got, or there. So you've got the Christianity, sort of the pull between those religions. And I love the fact that it's like, yes, we treat them as though like, just like horrors, but it seems like the first scene of the book is her father, who is the demon priest, performing an exorcism. And it seems like, it does seem like a very much a part of the culture. Like, that you would not, that it's not this like totally weird paranormal, only in a horror movie kind of thing. So I thought that was fabulous. I know, tell us about the sort of the demon priest, because that's an unusual thing for us too. And are there people that perform exorcisms, and why would why would we do that? What's happening? Is it just badly behaved children? Because I have a couple that we could exercise too.
Like, yeah, if anyone's performing an exorcism, someone's going to come perform them on my dogs because they're just
right.
they act like they're possessed.
Exactly.
No, it's interesting because there are sort of like two branches of it, and I discuss this a little bit in the books as well. We have kapuas and katadiyas, and sort of so almost there are those that deal with like the devyo, the gods, essentially seeking out blessings. So culturally we are very, I think, superstitious, right? And we believe in like, very spiritual also, right? So on the first day of every month, most households, they would make milk rice, for example, like rice made with coconut milk, because it's considered to be good luck. Or before you move into a new house, you would call your kapua, who deals with sort of the gods of the good spirits. You call them to come in, and maybe they'll cut some lime and they'll bless your house. Sometimes they'll do like a check to see if there are any bad spirits sort of lurking around within the walls
I
of your
love
house.
that. I absolutely love that. I mean, that's
And these are things, I mean, they're done to this day. Like most Sinhalese, like the more traditional Sinhalese families would have their family like kapua who would come and help you out. If you're going through a bad time, they might tell you, hey, wear this talisman around your neck, and these are very normal things that happen. The exorcisms per se, I mean, less as we, I guess, but still very much. I mean, I was in down the coast just maybe about a year ago, and the place that we were staying at, the little Airbnb, like all the people who were working there were having this big conversation. They're like, are you going for it? Are you going for it? There's a tovil, which is an exorcism, there's a tovil happening, just a little way down. I did not go for it, sadly, but my husband did, and he was
that's
like,
awesome.
yeah, it's just the same as it was carried out so many years ago. there was a book actually that I referenced pretty heavily when I was writing Island Witch, and it was called On Demonology and Witchcraft in Ceylon. It was written in 1860, and it
Wow.
outlined a lot of these practices and things that were carried out, and it's pretty much still carried out in almost exactly the same way to this day.
I
So
love
it's
that.
pretty.
Well, and I love the idea that you're talking. I mean, it's yes, it's superstition, but it's I think to your point, it's really it's a spirituality. It's an
Mhm.
acknowledgement of a higher power. And I actually
Mhm.
love that. Like, we steal a lot of those things from like Native Americans, like saging the house when you move in, or if
Mhm.
you've gone through something hard and that kind of thing. And I think, I appreciate the fact that you're saying that you're sort of acknowledging it's not just us, right? There is something, and you can ask for blessings or give thanks to things that are, working in the world. And I think that makes the culture so rich. And I sort of wish, and we have some of that. And also you can, we pull it from other places, but I love the idea of that, because I think
Mhm.
it just leaves much more space for other entities, right? That we're not just like, and I don't know what I believe, but I definitely believe there's more out there than just like us. You know what I mean? And I don't think it has to be one God, one, I don't know. So I
No, of
love
course.
that.
And it's interesting because I think Sri Lanka especially, there are a few. So we have obviously like a big Buddhist population, but there's also a
Yes.
lot of Hinduism, and the two
Right.
religions tend to be quite entwined. We also have Christianity.
Mhm.
Um, but it's interesting because I think within sort of the country, religion and culture are meshed in a really interesting
Mhm.
way. So you might not be Buddhist or you might not be Hindu, but you might still follow a lot of this, or get your horoscope read, or
Yeah.
which is different from the way it's read in the West. But
Yes.
all these other things that you do, which is, it sort of supersedes religion. It's
Yeah.
just like just an understanding of like, hey, this is the way we are, which has always been
Right.
so fascinating to me.
Yes. And I love the idea, right, that you don't have to be any of those things to participate in pieces of all of
Hmm.
them. I
Hmm.
really appreciate that. And, we have to talk about sort of the women factor. So one of the things, of course, because we're killer women, and one of the things I love about this is, first of all, I love your acknowledgments. So you are like, this is dedicated to all the strong women that you were raised by, but then all the women who are there who support one another. I got shivers when I read that. It was so fabulous. And I think it's interesting too, because here we're talking about a time where these women, the families are trying to be in favor with the British, right? Because the British are, bringing in, and they're promoting people and giving them land. And so of course, lots of families are wanting to participate with that. But then also it means losing some of their culture or giving up some part of their heritage, because the British they weren't known obviously for being super appreciative of other people's ways, right? They came in and they were like, this is how we do things, like most colonial societies,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
so but so the women, this is in terms of the time in history where women didn't have very much power, and the time, in this country where even the natives didn't have as much power as maybe the incoming colonials. I'd like to talk about the way that this woman in white you've imagined
Mhm.
is really does seek out some sort of like justice for people who are sort of, under, well, suppressed, repressed, all the things. So that was so fun. So talk to us about like where that came from. Is that in your mind, has the woman in white sort of always represented sort of a female power versus
I
like a
think
trickster?
I it's easy, right? I feel like in history, we've always taken these sort of like female entities, and we've just like come up with these stories for them, right? And like it's always a woman, right? And it's
Right.
always like I feel like women were like scapegoated in a lot of situations without actually anyone
Yeah.
like kind of trying to find out like why the story, like why did it go that way? Like why is there a woman holding a baby? Like what is that act of desperation, right? For a woman to be
Right.
holding a baby, like what does she gain from it? Why is she there?
Right.
Who drove her there, right? And I
Right.
think that's the question that we don't ask often enough. And I feel like it's so easy for women, especially, to be vilified throughout history. Like you hear these stories of these like terrible, angry women, or these terrible, cruel, wicked women. And we just don't know how they got there. Like, why are they wicked? Why are they called these names? Why are they the scapegoat? And so for me, that's always something that really sort of it's something that I've always been curious about. It's something that's really driven me in a story to just kind of look beyond and be like, okay, like there's a evil spirit who's a woman, or there's like the evil stepmother, or there's like the
Yeah.
wicked, like why are they wicked? Like why are we just, like the Wicked Witch of the West? I'm like, why was she wicked?
Right.
Right?
What
Like
happened to her?
so bad. Like someone killed her sister and took her sister's shoes, and she just wanted them. Like, why are we why are we so quick to jump to that conclusion? And why has that conclusion not been questioned? Um,
Yeah.
right? So we all grew up sort of blindly following these stories. And yeah, it's one of the things that I like to think about late into the night when I'm
Yes.
raging.
Exactly. But it is interesting because I think if you really dissect those, right? I mean, it's like why we're still so hard on one another. It's a manipulation of a system to make, sort of to pit us against each other. It's like the idea of working mothers versus stay-at-home mothers. Like if it was just women talking, we would know that that's not an easy decision on either side, right? It's not easy to stay at home with those babies. It's not easy, or in a bigger sense, to decide not to have children versus to have children, right? I mean, this is another thing women are judged for. Does anybody judge the men for not staying at home with their children or for not having
Right.
babies? No, of course not. But it's a system that is set up for us to fail no matter sort of what decision we make, right? You kind of can't, as a woman, you kind of can't get it right. So you can imagine that pushes women, like these spirits, these demons, these, I mean, Medusa, the sorceresses, all of them, sort of, you can imagine them being pushed to the point where the only recourse was to totally lose their shit, right? To go berserk.
Yeah. And like,
And it's
sometimes you feel like all power to them, right? Like, why not?
exactly, if you can't work with the system, you got to work against it. I totally agree. Now, you talked in your acknowledgments about this book being different to write. And I think it's always interesting because I totally appreciate that. Not that any book is really easy, but some of them come in a much more sort of like a bigger wave or more fluently or something. So tell us about the process of writing this. When did you decide you were going to do it? And how is it different?
Yeah, I mean, kudos to my editor, Jen Monroe at Berkeley. I think we were having a chat, and I was going to write a totally different book, right? I had outlined it, and I think, already started. I had written a couple of chapters. I was all geared up to write this other book, and so we were on a call, and so we were just discussing the plot of this other book, and just at the end, as a throwaway, I was like, "Hey, Jen, I've been kicking around this idea for a really long time." And I have, like, this idea took root many years ago, and I wrote an outline, and then I don't know, I think I just wasn't in that emotional place to write the book, so I just had the outline and I'd set it aside. And then I think maybe 2 or 3 days before this call, I just pulled it out and I was like, hey, this looks like fun. Like, I think I could do this now. And so just like as a throwaway at the end of the call, I was like, hey, I had this idea, I'm calling it Island Witch, but like, this is what it's about. And she was like, I think that's the one. I think that's the one. Please, like, can you send me like a full outline? Can we talk more about that? And yeah, so that's sort of where it took hold. And the book is, of course, heavy, right? I was used to writing obviously more contemporary, funny, lighthearted. I mean, murder, but still still a little bit more
More,
like humorous, right?
yeah,
But
more like just surfacey twisty, not so many deep issues. There's a lot of, but not in it, like I didn't ever feel like, oh God, it's too dark, I can't. It's so compulsive because you want to understand what's happening to her, you want to understand what's happening to the people that are being attacked. I didn't feel like I was, so I want to make sure people don't think it's not heavy, but it's, yeah, and the atmosphere is, the jungle
yeah,
is so, yeah, it's layers of stuff that's really fun.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, the historical setting on its own just sets it, it makes it different. And then there's, I think, a lot more of these like Gothic layers, right? Which is different from like your faster paced contemporary thriller type things. And also it was bringing in these supernatural elements,
Right.
which weren't there in the previous books. So there was a lot of that. And I mean, I did also write a lot of the book during a pretty tough time, just in the country. So I was living in Sri Lanka. It was there was like a massive political and economic crisis happening. We were all protesting. We were going out onto the streets. There were these rolling power cuts. So I remember like I would start writing and I would just pray that my laptop battery didn't die,
Right.
because I ended up charging it up because there were like 8 hours without power sometimes.
Right.
And yeah, so it was a lot. So I think I was definitely feeling a lot of feeling.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, writing is the outlet, right, for me. So
Yeah.
a lot of that rage and that frustration did get channeled into the books. So, if people ask me that, like, are you really like, are you that? I'm like, not normally. I'm not normally so ragey.
You're like, you look so normal, but wow. Well, and I love is it Sonali that's in there? The how do we say it? Sunalese, the language.
Sinhalese, yeah.
Sinhalese. Okay, yeah. I saw that's another beautiful thing because I think just to see the another language in the book and have it just to get to look at the way the words look, and that was really neat. I mean, a lot of the words I'm like, okay, I don't know how I'm pronouncing this because I'm just gonna make it up in my head, but I loved seeing um I love seeing those words on the page and feeling like you are there. I think that was a beautiful addition versus just giving it to us in English.
Yeah, it was a big deal for me. Of course, like I'm Sri Lankan. I grew up in Sri Lanka. I speak
Yeah.
Sinhalese, and there's so much, and I know that a lot of it is for me, right? Because sometimes the language, like it doesn't, it just doesn't work the same way if I were to just give it sort of almost flat out in English in my head when the scenarios are playing out. And I think especially things like so she calls her mom Amma and her
Yeah.
father Tata, which is what we would call our parents in Sri Lanka. And being able to just even include those everyday words and those everyday colloquialisms in it really mattered a lot to me. And I think it really just helped the story be more authentic.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, if I think that is one of the things that the gift of, people, like being an author from Sri Lanka that you can give to us that I couldn't write this book, right? I mean, I could have like done the research and written it, but to have the sort of the authenticity of your growing up in Sri Lanka is experience I will never have. And that's one of the things that's my favorite about reading, all sorts of books, right? Is the idea that you get to learn, you get to be somebody else for a little bit, so for some time, for these pages, I am a, Sri Lankan girl. And that is obviously not my experience, which I loved. So I think you do a beautiful job of that. And I love the witch woman with the milky eyes. There's all these fabulous, and her old friend Neha, and then the new friend she meets, Bob. I'm gonna
Bhagya.
yeah, Bhagya. I mean, it's just like there's so many aspects of it, but then there's also this universality, right? We've all felt from our parents that distance, or that our mother wants something from us that we can't be for her, and there's that push pull of generations, and the way her mother feels from her parents. Like it's just it's a really, I think what it's so fabulous when you can read a book that is so different from your own experience and feel those commonalities too. So
Thank
that
you.
I love. So I am a little curious, like, why is it, I think these ideas sort of, so a lot of this is also about survival, right? It's survival as a woman. It's learning, surviving betrayals. I mean, in some cases it's physical survival, but, so what do you think? Why do these themes appeal so much to us? As a writer, is it a way of sort of reminding ourselves that we can survive difficult situations, or what do you think? Why do we do this? Why do we do this crazy thing?
And why do we do this crazy thing? Why do we do it to ourselves?
Yes.
Why do we do it to others? No, I think, well, just as I think there's, and you spoke about universality, which is, I think where this kind of comes from, right? Is that at the end of the day, we've all felt like the underdog at some point, right? And we've all felt excluded and perhaps othered in some way. And I feel like those are very universal feelings, regardless of, whether you're a 18-year-old girl trying to make it in a little coastal village overruled by the British in Ceylon, or, just a woman in today's day and age trying to carve your place out in the world and find out who you are. And, I think this like push-pull of societal norms, it hasn't changed really, like at its core. Like we're all still trying to live up to some, I don't know, expectation. None of us know what that final point even is. Like none of us know how do we verbalize being, I think, maybe successful or happy, or like we don't know. Like we don't know what we're aspiring to. We just know we're aspiring to something.
Right.
And I think a lot of us can just relate to that as writers and as readers, right?
Yes. And I think it's true for men too. Like, I think, I said, obviously, I think as women, it's natural for us to write about women, but obviously it's universal. It doesn't matter if you're,
Oh yeah.
male, non-binary, whatever. It's the same, it's those same experiences of being, like you said, left out. And so much of that, as she understands, is like Niha, who is her old friend, and they've become a little distant. Niha wasn't necessarily excluding her in the way she felt excluded. So much of this, we realize, is really happening inside our own heads, right?
Yeah,
and they sort of both had the sensation that they were being sort of excluded by the other. So I think that was a wonderful thing. And Niha's interpretation of, her belief, her Christian, sort of the way she takes on Christianity, is another thing. It's like she felt like Amara was sort of anti-Christianity, and it's like every group feels that sometimes like they're being sort of diminished, or like you said, or they're the underdog. So I thought that was fabulous. I have to say, I looked at your an old bio of you, and it said that you owned a bunch of cookie stores, and I don't know why this tickled me, but I was like, I kind of have to ask about the cookie stores.
It
Off
started
topic.
oh man, it just started. Okay, so it's like people look at me really expectantly when I say that. Like my husband's the baker, right? Like I am not the person that's like very particularly well versed in the cooking baking department.
Me neither, but I love that.
So it actually, yeah, it was just a fun thing that we did. Like I was craving, we just moved back to Sri Lanka, and I was craving these like chewy cookies that were easily available like in the US or the UK.
Yeah.
We were in the UK, and we just moved back to Sri Lanka. And there weren't any stores selling it, and so he made them. Like, so he did a bit of research, and like he made these cookies for me. I'm like, oh, they're so good, like they're so good, you should sell them. And he's like, hey, there are no cookie stores here, do you want to give it a try? And we're like, yeah, why not? It'll be like a fun little hobby for us to do. Like we had some, like we were in our 20s, like when you're in like your early 20s, you think like, oh yeah, everything's fine, I can do it. We were in that stage of our lives, right? Yeah, and it was just a lot more successful than we anticipated. So it was
I love that.
yeah,
I love
can't
that.
eat cookies anymore.
You can't. It ruined cookies for
it
you.
ruined it for no, it's not ruined. I mean, I'll occasionally like eat a cookie and I'll be like, damn, these are good. But it's just I ate so many cookies, right? That like first maybe 2 years of running the store. And like I would be because we'd go in and like we'd be at the store. And so then you're just like eating and eating and eating.
Right. Yeah. I had a
Yeah.
job as a frozen yogurt, just like person at a frozen yogurt shop one summer, and that's the same thing. Frozen yogurt does not appeal to me anymore. I must have eaten like my body weight in frozen yogurt that summer. So I think yeah, I get that. Well, that was so funny because I was like, again, it's like you said, it's like people, they look at you, you're like gorgeous and, funny and sweet. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, you wrote this book? And then on the same hand, you're the cookie baker, or you're not the baker, but you had a cookie store. So I just think I love that we are all a collection of contradictions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us any hint of what you're working on now? That don't you hate that? You're like, I'm just gonna like enjoy the success of this new book, which is absolutely fabulous. And now you want to know what's next?
I don't know. I mean, I am working on something, but
Not
I'm at
ready.
that stage where I'm working on something where everything is just like mush and everything just feels horrible and sounds horrible and
Oh, yeah.
you know that stage. You
Yes, I
yeah.
do. Unfortunately, I know it so well. I think I'm actually kind of there now too. I get that. So
Mm.
it's too soon, and I know there'll be another fabulous Amanda Jayatissa book coming, but in the meantime, this is fun. I want them to make this into a movie. I'm sure you do
Oh,
too. But
the
I think
dream.
it would be, I know, wouldn't that be so fun to get to see what they did with the special effects? Plus, I look at her. She is gorgeous. She's
Oh, that was
fabulous.
I am obsessed with the cover. Like not gonna
Yes.
lie. I need to get it blown up and like I need to hang it on my wall. Like I love it. I keep staring at it. It's just
It's
yeah.
so beautiful. And I love the fact that you can, you read about her, what she's her sarong and the top she's wearing, like all of it feels very authentic to the way the clothes are described in the book, which I thought was
Mhm.
fabulous. Because sometimes you see a book cover and think, that's not what she was wearing. That's not how I picture her, right? And in this
Yeah.
case, like it is totally how I picture her.
I mean, a huge thank you to the art team at Berkeley, who
They did
really
a good one.
honestly went above and beyond. I sent them like photos, and we actually had so much back and forth on what would be considered authentic, and like
Yeah.
historically accurate, and we just they really paid a lot of attention to that detail, which I appreciate
Yes.
so much because that was my big fear as well, right? You're like, oh my God, are they going to just put her in? And I guess it's interesting because Sri Lankan culture and the way we dress is distinct from sort of like Indian culture, and that's what
Yeah.
it's actually seen. So I remember like having to explain, like, no, she's Sinhalese, she wouldn't be having like, a bindi, or she wouldn't have
Yes.
a lot of
Yes.
like the headdress sort of jewelry. And there's a lot, and they really just took everything on board and ran with it. And like, wow, it looks so
I
beautiful.
know. And I do think, I hate that we judge books by the covers, but we totally do. And I do feel like this is one that's going to just stand out beautifully. If you're listening to us and you can't see it, go on look at Island Witch and Jayatissa, Jayatissa, in case that's
That's
another
right.
thing that's in your brain hard to see. But you'll find her if you search Island Witch and My Sweet Girl and You're Invited. They're all really fun, really different books. So Amanda, so excited for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited and a little nervous, not gonna
Of
lie.
course. Of course. That is all part of it. That is absolutely all part of it. But I really think people are going to love it. And I have all these. This is what I do when I love a book is I find all these little moments that
I
I
love
was
that so
fabulous.
much.
And I did quote it the like very beginning, as you heard for my Monday quote of the week. So if you missed that, go back and listen because you'll get a flavor for the book and for Amanda's writing, which is fabulous. So this was so fun.
Oh yeah, I had such a good time. Thank you. I'm in that like pre-publication jitters period. So this was a lot of fun. Totally helped me ease into it.
Oh, I know.
So
You're gonna be great. I know what you mean though. It's of course, like if there's the first reviews and all the insanity of all the excitement, but then one little thing can really sort of just make you feel derailed. But I'm a huge fan. I love this book. I think it's gonna be really well received. And if you haven't heard of Amanda and you haven't picked up Island Witch, you got to go get it right now. It's really, really a fun read. Especially, I think I really enjoyed it too because it's like minus 40 degrees here, and so she's like running through the jungle in like a skirt and a, you know, her little white blouse, and I'm like, oh, it sounds so lovely. Even though she's running from a demon, which doesn't sound quite as appealing. All right. Well, listen, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, this was Killer Women with Amanda Jayatissa.
No, thank you for
Bye.
having me.
Thank you. Until next time.